You've done something great and it's not converting. Just, I'm done. I don't want to feel this way anymore. You think I'm going to put something out there and then people won't really look further. They'll just see the ad. They won't have time to think and they'll go to the landing page. And even if it's a bad user experience, they're still going to buy. And the truth is, it's just not going to happen like that. When you're building a business, making sure that that structure is really there means that your ads will be so much more successful. In its first month, they actually signed a $100,000 client in America. I personally saw the results. There's no pushback. This stuff works.
So Vital, before we go deeper, I wanted to ask you, why does this painful gap happen between who we are and who we're perceived, even to experienced founders?
It takes a lot of research to make sure that the message that you think is getting out there is the way that it's being received. So I think even on a basic level, if you think about relationships, and there was this theory of the 5 love languages, and it's how people feel loved. And you think that your partner is going to feel loved when you give them a present. So you buy them presents or you give them words of affirmation. And then, you're kind of years down the line and it's just I don't get it. I feel like I'm showing appreciation and they're feeling that they're still not appreciated. And then you kind of sit down and you're like, oh, and they say, you ask them that question, which, you've never really asked, which is, what would it take for you to feel appreciated? And actually, sometimes you don't even know the answer. But other times they'll turn around and they'll say something completely different to what you've been doing. Actually, words of affirmation isn't what I need, but I really need to know that every morning you've just made my coffee. There's acts of service, or if you say that you're going to take out the bin, those small things really matter to me. So if we have a disconnect in terms of people that live together all the time and how they're feeling and how messages are being received, then even more so on a business level where you can't always kind of control the way that they're hearing the message. So I think it really goes back to an understanding of research, speaking to people when you put something out there and saying, how are you receiving this? Is there anything in this language that I've maybe put in the latest newsletter or put in my bio that isn't really speaking to you? Are you feeling confused about anything? If I asked you to now explain what I do to someone else, would you be able to do it? Or how would you explain to me what you think I do? And I think that the more you have those conversations, and I remember when I was building my business at the beginning, I was bullish about having so many feedback sessions, I just want to run this by you, and it would be different people in different kind of areas. And I would just get amazing feedback. That isn't speaking to me. That seems a little bit off. And you just tweak and tweak and tweak until you feel that there's a really big connection between what you're saying and what people are receiving.
If you can share why this happens.
Because I think we don't do enough research. On a practical level, I don't think that we put out the message enough times to enough people to understand what we need to do differently. So I think that when you're starting a business or when something isn't working, it comes down to speaking to the people you're trying to attract and just saying, anything you would do differently, anything that, exactly what we spoke about before. But I really think that's why there's a disconnect, because we don't spend enough time researching, is there a real problem? Why do so many startups fail? Because they're not really solving a problem that people feel connected to. You may think it's a problem, but when you do your research, or if you don't, then you're not really sure that enough people feel the same way.
What are some of the real costs, let's say emotional, financial, of not controlling how you're perceived?
So I think it's just understanding that people connect with people. So, when a company page on LinkedIn is trying to talk about a product, no one's really engaging. It doesn't feel like there's really a person behind it. But when that's the difference between when Virgin says, we're having a competition, or when Richard Branson says we're having a competition. People trust Richard, but people don't necessarily trust the company. And I think company trust is just falling apart because people have hid behind a name for so long. So what they really want to see is a founder that's kind of able to be transparent about the journey. I'm a small business owner. This is what's happening on my day-to-day basis, or this is something that was really hard this week, or this is something that went really well this week. And when people are building with you, you're building your company and you're bringing people along with you, they feel more involved. And so they're more likely to buy and invest in the end product. If why do even larger brands do this? Let's say they're launching a lipstick and they think, we're a beauty brand. I'm going to think about who are our 50 most engaged Instagram followers. It doesn't have to be influencers, just followers. And they'll say, do you know what? Let's bring the 50 followers together. Let's get them to try out the lipstick. They can write about this on their Instagram. We'll do an event and everyone will try the lipstick and I want the feedback, and then they'll give us the feedback and then we'll tweak the product. These 50 people are so invested in that end result. The minute that goes, live, and the minute the end result is out and ready to be available to buy, they're running to the shops. We're the same, because a person was there. A person took us on the journey. So at the same time, we need to do the same with our people that we're trying to get to buy from us. We need to show them that we're real, that we're like them, that we go through the same experiences on a daily level. So if you don't really invest in the personal brand, it's just really missing out on a great selling tool.
If you're ready to take your business to the next level, don't miss out on my free burnout-free business guide. It's a simple 7-day plan to help you reset your relationship with your business, improve your mindset, and achieve more while staying balanced. You can download it right now by using the link in the description. Can we have your definition of a personal brand? What the personal brand is according to you?
I think everyone has a reputation, but not everyone has a personal brand. And a personal brand is a reputation built with intention. So I think that's like the differentiation in terms of that. And then how you know that you have a successful personal brand is when your name is being mentioned in rooms that you're not in.
And when does it become non-negotiable?
When does it become non-negotiable? So I don't think that there's a wrong time or right time to do it, which is meaning that it can always, it's a bit like kids. There's never a right time to grow a family. It will always feel like a little bit wrong and a little bit right, but you do it anyway. And I think a personal brand is something that just can only enhance your life. And so it just depends when you're willing to really kind of get down and dedicate the time, or build a team and pay a team to really do it for you. So I don't think there's a wrong time.
So how does that look like? What are the ingredients of a good brand?
So I think that it starts with strategy. So, sitting down on a personal branding level, and it's saying, what do you want to be known for? Where do you want to be in 5 years? You've just worked with a team. What is it that you did that was so great? Why were they calling you? What could they not do without you in the room? How do you want to be remembered? So I think that the strategic piece of understanding, what does even a successful brand look like to you? Are you trying to get more speaking engagements? Are you trying to get onto more boards? Are you trying to make sure that when you release your book, more people buy it? Is it newsletter signups? Is it all of the above? And I think working out, how they define success and you define success, and making sure that it's on the same page is really important, because you could be building this personal brand to, get more speaking opportunities. And they could be saying, listen, that's not going to, I can't charge enough through speaking opportunities. Actually, success looks something different for me. So I think it starts with defining success. And then it starts out with building this idea of the strategic sessions of, what does the business really look like that I want to build? Who am I trying to target? Who am I not trying to target? How do I want to speak? How do I not want to speak? Who do I want to be like? Who do I not want to be like? And also a lot of pushback on my end, being able to say, you've said that you want to do this and you want to sound like this, but really your values that you've said don't align with that. So there's a disconnect. What does it mean? It's not really what you want to be like. So I think it's a lot of honest therapy, or making sure that thing and that personal brand that you're building is true to yourself. And then I think the second component, once this strategic session is finished, which normally takes about 10 to 12 hours, is moving on to this verbal identity. So verbal identity is the principles of how you speak. And anyone that's writing your content needs this, so it's understanding what are the principles that you want to put across into your content. You want to come across punchy. What does it mean on a practical level? How do you start your emails? What's the tone of voice that you're trying to get across? What's the ChatGPT prompts that you're putting in? How do they look? What is a mock-up LinkedIn post? All of these kind of things, and making sure that when anyone kind of handles your content, they have the right principles. Otherwise, you sit there and you're repeating the same things over and over again, and essentially only you can write the content because only you know how you sound. So getting those things out onto paper is really important. And then the final component is okay, so we've done the strategy. We know where you want to go. We know what you're trying to do. And we know how you speak on a verbal level, but how does it look? So we take everything and we say, okay, fine. So now it gets a visual identity, and it gets a logo, and it gets a palette, and it gets an icon, and it gets a secondary icon, and it gets a pattern. When we're talking about building a brand, we're making sure that the visual and the verbal reflect strategic decisions.
Avital, you're not the typical branding expert people expect to meet. You proudly talk about being an Orthodox Jewish wife and mother, smashing stereotypes. So if you briefly share, how did you get into this space? Why branding? And what's your advice on how to deal with preperceptions?
So I spent a lot of time actually in America. We just happened to do a lot of family vacations there. I think that was like the first time I'd really seen Starbucks or Lululemon. I always was fascinated when they opened up in the UK or even like a Barry's boot camp. How do you kind of create the same sort of feeling? How is it that the Starbucks in every country has the same vibe, the same energy? Like, what does it do to how kind of like tight must those principles be? And then about a year later, I wanted to move out to Israel, and I actually joined the venture capital fund, which is called Greylock. The Israeli version was 83 North. It went out by itself. It was previously part of the same office. And I was in value creation. So, working through with different companies in the same role, head of marketing in all the portfolio companies, what are the problems you're facing, and again, entry to market. How can we do it differently? What needs to be tweaked? You're not really understanding American culture. And then during this time, I kept getting the same question. Oh, who should I go to for my branding? Who should I go to for storytelling? Who should I hire for this? And our pitch deck. And I just thought I could do that. And I'm going to hire a team of the things I can't do, but I have the network to, make this happen. People are always coming to me. What if I just said that, I knew how to help them and brought in the right people to do anything that I wasn't able to do? That was really kind of like the company and how it began nearly 8 years ago. And in its first month, it actually signed a $100,000 client in America.
Wow.
And so that's really how it started. And in terms of like smashing stereotypes, I grew up in London and I grew up modern Orthodox. And definitely, was happy to shake a man's hand, definitely ate dairy out, wasn't particularly fussy about things. And then when I became more Orthodox, I just still didn't leave that passion of business behind. And I thought, well, there's got to be a way to do this. And so I think that for me, when you speak, and first of all, the British accent, it's also like a bit different what people are expecting.
Right.
And I just think being on top of business and trends and really knowing what you're talking about. And then it doesn't really matter whether, you're wearing a wig or not really shaking someone's hand or not able to eat the same food. And I also think it comes from like a quiet confidence, being able to say, okay, so you am what I was expecting, but I still think I have a lot of value to add to the table. If I walk into the meeting and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I can't shake your hand and I can't eat here. And, this feels really uncomfortable. And like, I just need to only be in an all-female environment, then it's not going to work. But if you're able to feel confident in who you are and kind of know your no's, it's so much easier to know your yeses. Interestingly, like most of my clients are either not Jewish or secular. And I or feel that like leads to such an interesting conversation because it's just so what they wouldn't have expected. They would have expected to work with like a typical Tel Avivi, kind of like branding. And I remember actually having this meeting with someone he had exited his company, but he was telling me about the branding agency that he had used. And he was like, they just walked into the room and they oozed coolness and energy, and he was like, I get the energy from you, but like, you don't really give off this like, really trendy, cool vibe. And I was like, you're right. I bring off a sophisticated, intelligent, worldly, intellectual approach to branding.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not what you're looking for, then I'm not your girl. And that's fine. There's enough people that want, who I am for that, and enough people looking for something different that it works.
Before we go deeper, there's one thing I think a lot of us, including myself, wrestle with. When you're scaling, there's a real tension between building a long-term personal brand or just doubling down on fast marketing wins like ads and funnels. Branding feels slower and riskier. Marketing feels faster and more measurable. So Avital, how do you think about that trade-off?
So I think that brand always comes before marketing. So I think that like that's like in terms of like whenever you're thinking about an order, if you're really kind of building strategically, you'll build the brand before you'll build any kind of marketing. And I think that on a practical level, when you put out, let's say you're really doing tons of ads. I was working with a Facebook ad specialist for one of my clients, or I was trying to onboard him before I'd, worked with him and making sure that he'd be available. And I was saying to him, like, what do you do when you're doing Facebook ads and maybe even the product works and it's a good product, but then you're taking them to a landing page and it is just like a hot mess? and, the user experience hasn't been thought through and the pictures aren't great and like all the imagery they gave you was really good for the ads, but then you brought them back to the landing page and like, then what? And he just said it doesn't convert. And I think like you think I'm going to put something out there and then people won't really look further, they'll just see the ad, they won't have time to think, and they'll go to the landing page. And even if it's a bad user experience, they're still going to buy. And the truth is, it's just not going to happen like that. So I think when you're building a business, making sure that that structure is really there means that your ads will be so much more successful. So he said, when the landing page is great and the product really works and the branding really speaks the same language as the ads, the ability to sell and make the ad successful is just so much higher. So I think when you do these idea of like short wins in marketing, it's just thinking short term. And if you want to be sustainable, you need to build long term. And that starts with building a brand.
So what's the real difference between branding that's loud and branding that's powerful?
The difference between loud and real is like a loud brand is just doing it for the likes. And when you meet that person in real life, whether it be at a conference that you've flown in to hear them or they run a course and you pay, the mirror's shattered and you're like, that just wasn't what I was expecting. Whereas like when it's real and when it's less bothered about being loud, there's like a total connection. And I want to say like a lack of a disconnect. And I think that for me, when I meet my followers, in real life, let's say off LinkedIn, and they give a presentation or I'm giving a workshop and they've paid to come, I always say like, am I what you imagined? And they're like, exactly, like the brand that you portray online and offline is exactly the same. And I think that's when you know that you're doing a really good job of building an authentic and real, honest brand.
Is there one thing that we should know about personal branding that nobody talks about?
I think so many people think I'm just going to, try it. I'm going to go on LinkedIn. I'm going to go on Instagram, but I'm not going to really think about the strategy first. And without the strategy, you're kind of just shooting in the dark and you'll see growth. And over time, you'll begin to be able to see what works. But if you went through it in advance and you thought, what do I really want to be known for? What are the content pillars that I want to focus on, through social media? What do I want to, avoid speaking about? What are my no's? What are my yeses? And you go through this process. The kind of like growth trajectory is so much quicker because you've gone through that at the beginning and you haven't spent, a few years working out what's great and what's not. It's really hard as a founder, like to do all the things that running a business really needs, right? And so when you have this identity and you can outsource your newsletter because someone understands your voice, and you can outsource your LinkedIn posts, or you can say, listen, I want to write a book, and you can give it to someone and you can voice note your ideas and they just get it because they have this guide in front of them. It saves you so much time. So again, it feels like a lot of work. It feels like that big investment at the beginning. And also everything rests on visuals. So, making sure that your videos open in the same way, making sure that you have like a strong banner that's consistent with your website coloring. All of these things matter and build trust. And when you neglect them, it means that I'm coming to your LinkedIn page. You've done something great. You've got me there. And it's not converting because now I look at your website and either there is no website or the website's, 10 years old because you just didn't think it mattered and that you could rest on it. Like people want to trust the person. And so going through this process of building a personal brand on a strategic level just makes it so much easier in the long run. So that's what I think people don't recognize. They think that I can go straight to marketing and it's going to be fine. And maybe it will for some, but for most, they'll realize I'm just giving this over and over again. I'm having to explain my design feelings over and again to the designer. I'm having to explain the way I speak. I'm done. I don't want to feel this way anymore. I want to do it once and I want it to be relevant for the next few years.
So in conclusion, if your brand isn't clearly communicating who you really are, it's probably working against you. But how do you actually fix that? How do you build a brand that actually works without faking it and without burning out in the middle of the process? That's exactly what we're diving into in the next chapter of the conversation with Avital.